Hey everyone, let's quickly wrap up November. Another month with few videos but many decent books. So let's start with the videos. We talked about book buying habits. I told you how I buy my books and you replied with a lot of habits you have, and I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I wrote a letter to November, which I'm glad it's gone. Thank you for watching that, and hopefully December will bring more videos again. So now on to the books. I reviewed this first book. It's Heart of Stone by Ben Galley. I read it on my Kindle and I basically went into it with wrong expectations. That's why I didn't like it so much. Also, I had issues with the writing that probably a lot of other people don't have. Other than that, the story is a fantasy story. It's rather interesting, just not what I wanted, but I was invested enough to read the whole thing. Better watch the full review for more details. The only physical book I read in November was The Day Before Happiness by Eri De Luca. It was translated by Jill Fulston, I think, from Italian to English. This was basically a cover buy because I loved the title and I really enjoyed the novel. It's a coming of age story of an Italian orphan. I think it plays somewhere in the 60s. The little boy grows up and he's basically meeting with an old man all the time who's taking care of him and tells some stories of the end of the war. So we learn a lot about Naples and the end of the war, and we learn a lot about growing up in Italy, very poor, and yeah, some masculine things there. Can't say it in another way. But I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting in parts, and since it's short, it wasn't dragging. The last ebook I read was Serious Man by Manu Joseph, which I really enjoyed in the beginning. I loved how he looked at society. I love Manu Joseph's writing. It's very interesting how he uses similes and metaphors, and I really love that. Also how he portrayed Indian society, the case differences with the untouchables and the Brahmins, and all of those things. So it's very interesting. Also, he has a female character working among male scientists and how that feels. It felt very realistic and very well done. Unfortunately, the story itself lagged after 100 pages or so. I was like, I'm really not that interested in the plot. I really enjoyed the portrayal of Indian society and how life there is. But other than that, for the story, I cannot recommend it. I'd rather recommend The Illicit Happiness of Other People, which I've also read by him. The rest of the books I read in November were audiobooks. I reviewed No Sweat by Michelle Segar because I really enjoyed it. It's a non-fiction book about exercising and finding motivation to exercise, and in general a little bit looking at the science of motivation. And I highly recommend it if you struggle with exercising or if you struggle with getting someone you know to exercise more. Because I learned a lot from the book, despite really enjoying exercise. One of my favorite books this month is definitely The Dispatcher by John Scalzi, which was read by Zachary Quinter. And I loved it so much I couldn't stop listening. It's only 2.5 or 3 hours long, and I listened to it in one setting. I was walking around Lisbon on vacation and I just couldn't stop. I loved the voice, I loved the story, and everything was just entertaining. It's somewhere set in the future, and a dispatcher is someone who kills someone, or rather murders someone before they die, so they get reborn in a way. They just don't die. They find themselves back in their body. And it's a very interesting story, and a story around another dispatcher. Can highly recommend it. My least favorite book of the month was probably Z, a novel about Zelda Fitzgerald by, I forgot the name. But the book didn't feel good. In the beginning I thought it was maybe the narrator, Jenna Lamia. I'll write it down somewhere. And she had a very snobby way of talking, and I thought it was maybe that's what bothered me. But as the book continued, I figured out that it's the portrayal of the character, Zelda herself, and she came across as very ungrateful, demanding, and spoiled, and not a nice person. I didn't really learn a lot about her that made her likable. And I don't know, it was not a book I would recommend to anyone. Okay, only 2 more books. One was a non-fiction book, The Descent of Man by Grayson Perry, and I enjoyed that. It's very short as well, 3 hours or so, and you could sit through it. He looks at masculinity, how he experiences it, and also what he thinks our idea of masculinity today, what it means for society and how it is bad for society. It was very interesting. It was a very interesting point of view, and disclaimer, I have no idea who Grayson Perry is, but apparently he's famous in England. The last book I read was a science fiction book. It's We Are Legion, the first book in the Bobbyverse, I think, by Dennis E. Taylor. And it's basically talking of Von Neumann drones, and we have Bob, who is a Von Neumann drone, and he's going out into space. And the idea in the beginning is very good. It's very funny, and I really enjoyed Bob, our narrator and main character, and the things that happen were very interesting. But as the story progressed, it was very repetitive. We get a lot more Bobs, of course, because Von Neumann drones, and also they go out into space and explore things. So we get a lot of different places, which is kind of interesting, but due to the disconnection to everyone, it's kind of boring. The first book ended in a way that you can say, okay, it's ending, so I'm going to start the series here. I have some ideas how it's probably progressing, but since I got pretty bored by the second half of this book already, I'm assuming the other books in the series will be more repetitive than this one. So I'm gonna stop here. And that was my November. Let me know what you have read, if you have had some good books, some bad books, which ones you liked, and what else you did in November. Thank you for watching and sticking around. Bye bye.